Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. I'm Harper LeBel, along with Vincent Turner. Our producer and engineer today is Jeremiah Long, and today's Legends show goes back to quite a while. Vincent, you always do this to me. You bring up a player that I may have heard of, I may have thought about at one point or another. I'm wondering, I really couldn't tell you much about him, but today's guest that we're going to talk about, Willie the Wisp Galimore, born in March of 1935. And what a special thrill it was to not only learn about this man, but to see some highlights of him. We'll talk about it throughout the show, but great pick here. Obviously, a treasured Chicago Bear player, Florida A&M University also. But Willie Galimore, what a tremendous career this young man had.
Electric, Corvette quickness, explosive, exciting to see. Unfortunately, I wasn't born at the time, and then when he passed, I was only 3 years old. One of my father's favorite players, Mr. Chester Turner, Willie Galimore. Man, I'm excited that we're doing him today because he doesn't get his due respect as being one of the most explosive running backs to play in the National Football League. Back to you, Harper.
Well, let's look into Willie the Wisp Galimore. Again, mentioned that on March 30th, 1934, he's born in St. Augustine, Florida. He goes to Excelsior High School there in the area. I imagine he had to have been a track star at one point or another, aside with football. But baseball, basketball, who couldn't use a guy that can run a 9.700? You know, that's where he was timed at one point. Ends up at Florida A&M University, and some interesting scenarios there. His freshman year, he doesn't play, but they win the championship. They were 8-1 overall, and had a fantastic first year, even though he did not participate. He did not letter that first year. And going into his second year, there were only 19 returning lettermen. So a lot of young guys that they had to bring in to fill up their roster. But they were 8-2 and won the National Negro Football Championship in 1952. And in 53, he comes back, Vincent, and he ends up being the star. He's the left halfback, and every time that he touches the ball, it seems like, as you mentioned just a moment ago, electricity. This guy with his speed, his strength, he's 6'1". He weighed about 185, 89 pounds, somewhere in that range. But amazing things happen whenever Willie the Wisp ends up touching the football.
Think about this. When you're watching football, the most exciting play is when a running back breaks off an 80 or 75-yard touchdown run. You think about Tony Dorsett when he broke off long runs when he played. Or that's really gazelle, Mr. Erie Dickerson, when he broke off long plays. Even today with Derrick Henry, Billy Sims when he breaking off long runs, Reggie Bush. But when you think about Willie Galimore, he was the one that set the tone for all that. And what I remember about him when he was at Florida A&M and all the great players that's played there, Bob Hayes, Nat Newton, Glenn Edwards, Ken Riley. Think about 54 in the Orange Blossom Classic, which is a historical black college football game, and what he did against Maryland State. 295 yards in that football game, 3 touchdowns. And then they took 2 touchdowns away, an 87-yarder and a 72-yarder. He would have had over 400 yards back in 1954. But think about what he did on the field, and I don't want to hear about the competition. When you get a running back that almost rushed for damn near 450 yards in a game, that's special. And he still doesn't get, where I say, respect both on the college and the NFL level. But when you're talking about a guy that can take it coast to coast, that was explosive, it was Willie the Wisp Galimore. And it takes my father to tell you how special he was. One thing he told me about Willie Galimore is that when he saw a hole, he was like the road runner. Back to you, Hawk.
Well, Acme Birdsea must have been in the goal line because he got to enjoy that quite a few times. But Amazing career again. And again, going back to college just a little bit, they were 9-0 his first year that he got a chance to play. And that was his sophomore year in 1953. And again, they only had 19 players that returned. So a real young unit coming back from a 52 team that ends up winning the championship. In 53, we mentioned 9-0. In 54, they were 8-1. Again, they win a championship. They had a full 70-man roster there. The Orange Blossom Special or Classic was a part of when he was there. The 250-yard. They end up winning that game against Maryland State. It was 67-19. So even though there were two huge touchdowns that were called back, the team obviously they came to play on that day. Going into his senior year, he ends up with 3,592 yards rushing. He averaged a little bit more than 8 yards a carry. He was a 3-time All-American, and who wouldn't want someone like that on their roster? But he ends up meeting George Halas, and talk a little bit about the relationship that ends up happening where he ends up going to the Chicago Bears prior to the way that the scouting system ends up timing you in the 40. It's combine. It's systematically in place in a way that back in those days it wasn't. But great relationship that he ends up and he becomes a Chicago Bear.
You know, let's talk about Papa Halas for a minute. He had to be before his time, man, because think about this. He drafted and was part of three great running backs of our time: Galimore, Garrett Sayers, and Walter Payton. But how he met Willie Galimore is amazing. Mr. Halas loved them horses. And I don't know, he was either in Miami or he was somewhere in Florida. He knew somebody at the horse track. And they said, you know what, Mr. Halas, there's a football player down there at Florida A&M. He's got world-class speed. And you know, Mr. Halas loves to think out of the box. This is one of the guys that founded the National Football League. And he said, okay. Saw some film on Mr. Galimore, and the rest is history. Bring him to the Windy City, the Midwest, Chicago, and it takes off. The Chicago Bears, they go to another level. Back to you, Harp.
Yeah, and it's a split time. You mentioned the three different backs that were a part of the greatness in terms of Chicago Bears running back history. And he had to split time, and I think to his benefit, right? He got great numbers while he was with the Bears, but he kind of splits time with the others, and you're fresher. You end up having a longer career is the way that it's designed, and you're as good in the fourth quarter as you were in your first because you got a little bit more rest, and you're splitting time with some other guys. But obviously, being a part of the tremendous history that the Halas family had in Chicago up until just recently. His career, one of the things that I noticed, and there was a critique on him that I thought was very interesting, is Willie had the ability to have short, quick steps and then long strides and get to the outside and make something happen by doing both. Stepping in out of traffic, but then being able to get outside. And you can see by some of these pictures here. And please, ladies and gentlemen, if you get a chance, go to YouTube or look up Willie Galimore and see if you can't find some of the highlights where you see guys like Chuck Bednarik being the star of the announcement in terms of this is a guy that we couldn't catch. And you see some of the highlights of him. And he was so ahead of his time in terms of his speed, his ability to get down the field and make things happen. You're nodding your head in approval. Obviously, he really was an impressive running back.
Well, think about that time when he was with the Bears. They had big 6'8" Doug Atkins, one of the greatest players in the University of Tennessee football history, was a D tackle. And like you said, on one of those YouTube videos about Willie Galimore, he's a guy talking about Willie Galimore. And Doug Atkins, who's a Hall of Famer, one of the greatest defensive players in the University of Tennessee football history, said it plainly. I know we talk about a lot of great running backs at that time when I played. We had Jim Brown, we had Alan Amici, we had Hugh McEnhaney, we had Lenny Moore, we had Tommy McDonald. But he said, I'm being biased here. Willie Galimore is the best running back I played with. Simply because once Willie Galimore, and you brought up a good point, Harper, with the steps, Once he exploded through that hole, it was nobody's going to catch him. And go look at this other clip. His quarterback at the time, Bill Wade, Vanderbilt University, Nashville, Tennessee, said this about Willie Galimore. Not only Willie was an outstanding running back, but Willie could have been an NFL receiver in the likes of Randy Moss, in the likes of Chris Carter, in the likes of Michael Irvin. He talked about a play that he threw the ball down the field and Willie Galimore snatched it between two guys. Road runner. Back to you, Harp.
Well, he started 44 of the 82 games that he was able to play in. He rushed for just under 3,000 yards during that time. He averaged 4.5 yards per carry. He had over 1,200 receiving yards as well, 37 touchdowns that he was able to be accountable for. But for obvious reasons, everything was cut short. In training camp back in 1964, he ends up being in a traffic accident, and a small car. He and one of his teammates were getting back to camp. The collision itself, the small car flips over, and both of the players were killed. And this is on July 27, 1964. Obvious tragedy for the Bears, the organization, for obvious, well, the Galimore family. But this is just one of those things that you think, oh, there's no way. We should know so much more about Willie. We should know so much more about what he was able to do to change the game and to make it better. But the crash in and of itself was a horrible incident. They end up retiring his number. George Halas thought that much of him to be able to do that. His number was retired by the Chicago Bears forever. But your thoughts a little bit here on that portion of this story that ends up just being so sad.
I think when Willie Galimore would continue to play and running back with the Chicago Bears, he would have had a good, strong chance of being in the Hall of Fame. But when I think about Willie Galimore, and of course, I think about the HBCUs, I think about black college football, and I think about when people mention the great running backs that came out of those schools, the first name you hear is Walter Payton. You hear Marion Motley. Then you hear Leroy Kelly. Then you hear Tank Younger. Then you hear Emerson Boozer. But they say Willie Galimore in like a soft sentence. I want everybody to know out there in the SWAC and in the MEAC. And I don't know what y'all thinking about. And I got a lot of respect for Mr. Walter Payton. He is probably the greatest running back that's came out of HBCUs. But you better put your respect on Willie the Whisper Galimore's name. He by far was the most explosive football player at the running back position that came out of black college football. He's one of the most explosive running backs that's played in the National Football League. And during this time, everybody want to talk about Lenny Moore. And of course, it's righteousness that you want to talk about Jim Brown. It's righteousness that you want to talk about Bobby Mitchell. It's righteousness that you want to talk about Alan Amici and Frank Gifford. But as my friend right there said, Mr. Good-looking Harper LeBel, go back and look what Chuck Bernard, trying to butcher his name, said about Willie Galimore. This guy was a very, very special football player. Explosive, electric, and he got to get you up out of your seats. He was must-see TV. And it's sad that he died so early at the age of 29. He would have probably ended up in the Hall of Fame. One of the greatest Chicago Bears football players of all time. And if you want to put a stamp on it, ask Mike Ditka, his teammate of the 1963 Chicago Bears NFL championship team. Back to you, Hart.
Yeah, that's something else. I mean, he 63, the Bears end up becoming NFL champions. He was a Pro Bowler in 1958, and he's still considered, Willie Galimore is one of the 100 greatest Bears of all time. So he does have a ring. He left with at least that. And they had just won the championship. They're going into training camp that following year. And then again, that tragic accident. But he was a part of really changing things in Chicago and being part of that legendary status that the Bears, if you between 63 and 85, that 18-year period, There were some dry and some bad days, but the championship that can never be taken away. So there are some great things that were a part of him, and his numbers, his ability to get into the end zone. I mean, he was an electric player, as you mentioned, and really a fan favorite as well. They had to wait a few years before Gale Sayers comes in, and he fills that role a little bit. But the Bears were not the same. They didn't win the championships. They were close, but no cigar bears. He did get a championship, did Willie Galimore in 1963. Well, if you're interested in being a part of a championship, the Final Four is fast approaching. It's March Madness time, and NCAA basketball is high on everybody's priority. Has your bracket been filled out to the point where you would like to take advantage of some of the bets that you could place? MyBookie.ag is a place to go. For NCAA basketball, NBA playoffs are right around the corner. NHL playoffs and the beginning of the baseball season. Major League Baseball is just getting ready to start. If you would like to place a bet or two on any of those games and be a part of the exciting aspect of professional sports or even collegiate ones, then go to mybookie.ag. You can use the promotional code MM50 to get special rates. You can get some free bets. There's cash back, there's bonus chips that are available, and unexpected bonus prizes. The playoffs coming up, as I mentioned, the season openers, and obviously March Madness are a big part of what they would like you to take advantage of. So if you want to make some memories, be a part of some close games, and have some fantastic finishes, go to mybookie.ag and get an account opened up and use the promotional code one more time, MM50. We'd appreciate it greatly if you would use that and you could take advantage of it, and then they know that you're watching the show along with us. And speaking of the show, we're going to close today with just one more quick little memory about Willie Galimore, an amazing speed, an amazing athlete guy. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's an NFL championship. Final thoughts from you, Vincent.
Bad Leroy Brown, the baddest man from the south part of Chicago. Willie Galimore, brothers. Back to you, Harp.
Well, we appreciate the ability to talk about Willie Galimore. He was born in 1935. He died in 1964, only 29 years old, and a tremendous football player, and certainly one of the early Bear legends that we wanted to talk about on our Legend Show in 100 Yards Football. So for Vincent Turner, I'm Harper LeBel. Our producer and engineer is Jeremiah Long. We want to thank you for tuning in today. 100 Yards of Football greatly appreciates you being a part of the show. So thank you for being a part of it. Have a fantastic day, everyone.